Hey guys, I'm Ashley Wood with Albanian Voices, and today is the first installment of what I am now calling Ashley Reads You Her Articles from the Internet onto YouTube, because a lot of people don't like to read, so I am fine, I'll read it to you. So each article that I put out now, I'm just going to start reading it onto YouTube, so anyway, here you go. This article is published January 10th, 2015. It's called Are You Cold? And it can be found on albanianvoices.org. I'm just going to literally read it to you. Okay. My name is Ashley Wood, and I'm the Executive Director of Albanian Voices. Our organization aims to record Albanian oral history, preserve its culture, and teach others about it. Recently, we raised enough money through Indiegogo to fund a trip to Albania, Montenegro, Kosovo, and Macedonia, to research and document the Albanian culture there. I went with my Albanian American friend and vice director of the organization, Bora Shehu. We were there 1 month, and the amount we saw and did is incredible. As we put together a book documenting our experiences, I will release articles like these to give you a glimpse into our amazing adventures in these Albanian lands. So this is where the article begins, by Ashley Wood. If you want to see all the pictures, just go online. Okay. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Albanians are the most mindful people I've ever met. They are constantly aware of and tending to other people's physical needs. They will always make sure you are physically comfortable when you're with them. They'll ask you if you've got work, if you've slept well, feel good, if you've talked to your family and how they're doing. They'll make sure you've had coffee, and if you haven't, they'll offer to go get one for or with you. They'll make sure you've eaten, and if you smoke cigarettes, they'll offer you one, and if you don't, they'll offer you gum. Albanians make sure you're happy before they even start a conversation with you. In Albania, the concept of hospitality, or mikpritje, is sacred, and guests are treated with a high honor. They take this concept very seriously, and because of that, the generosity and friendliness that Albanians show to their guests is beyond anything I've ever seen in any other culture. One example of this is the custom of shoes. Every time Bora and I entered a home, we took off our shoes, as did everyone else. The host of the house would then distribute slippers for everyone's feet. At first it seemed weird, as the slippers were used over and over again for each guest, but I quickly got used to it because I needed them. Most of the floors were made of Spanish tile and really held in the cold. I had only experienced those kinds of tiles in Latin America, and was shocked at how much cold they absorbed now that I was in a different climate. Luckily, my feet were never cold in Albania, because I was always offered some kind of slippers, shoes, or socks. As you leave America and travel east, you will probably notice that the preference for an individualistic mentality shifts to a more group-focused one. This idea became much clearer to me on my recent trip to the Balkans. When I think of the lessons I learned concerning that mindset, only one word comes to mind: vtoft. I had studied a great deal of Albanian before I traveled to the Balkans for the first time, so I knew what vtoft meant. However, if I didn't, I would have learned it during my first week there. Vtoft means cold in Albanian, and since we arrived in mid-November and left mid-December, I heard that word every single day in one expression or another. Ash vtoft, they would say. It's cold. And then they would follow it up with a gesture such as shivering or wrapping their arms around their bodies to make sure I understood. I understood just fine. The problem was that I didn't really consider it to be that cold outside in the first place. The temperature fluctuated between 35 and 70 degrees the whole time we were there, usually hanging out in like the mid to upper 40s. I would shed my layers as we came inside, even dart from one building to the next without my coat on, and leave my scarf dangling around my neck, not even wrapping it around myself once. This seemed to bother people a lot. I didn't get it. My father's from New Jersey, and he always teased me that I should be tougher in the cold, especially when I was little. He's the kind of guy who rides in his convertible with only a t-shirt and shorts on in 35 degrees. Every time I said it was cold outside, he would comment that when he was a kid growing up in Jersey, and then begin his whole 2 miles uphill in the snow speech, both ways, you know. My mom, being from Florida, would just laugh when he told that story, while she pulled out another layer from the coat closet for me. I spent most of my childhood trying to show my dad that I wasn't afraid to be cold. When I grew up and became an adult, I married a Puerto Rican man, and then I had to do a 180 to prove that I could keep my cool in the tropics. No matter what I do, I cannot seem to be graceful like the Puerto Rican women, who barely break a sweat even on the hottest nights. Before I went to Albania, I was used to fending for myself, temperature-wise. Fending for yourself is a concept that American culture reinforces over and over. With my childhood consumed with learning how to not be cold, and my adulthood focused on learning how to not be hot, I thought my temperature lessons were complete for this lifetime. I never knew there would come a time when I would have to over-bundle up in a weather that I didn't consider to be that cold. And believe it or not, it was through this particular cultural phenomenon that I learned a great deal of my Albanian vocabulary as well as culture. Sometimes we would be in situations where someone was convinced we didn't have enough clothing on. They would either take off something they were wearing or go in their room and get a scarf, sweater, or blanket, handing it to me simply saying mer, or take. When they didn't know me well, they would say merni, which is how I finally internalized the difference between the formal and informal command forms. Every time Bora and I were with other Albanians and we stepped outside in the cold, someone would remark, "Oh, saftoft!" or "Oh, how cold!" Another would say, "Duhet te përdore shala sepse doftofish," meaning you should use that scarf because you'll get cold if you don't. And I repeated the words to myself, trying to internalize the grammar involved in using the modal word must, or duhet. We would quickly wrap ourselves in scarves and coats to heed their warning, having figured out fast that if we didn't, people thought we were literally insane. I began to notice that in every situation where a woman, and sometimes even a man, was seen with bare arms, legs, or scarfless, that same warning was issued. Dof dofish, which I came to learn was used as a backhanded insult when they thought the person, usually a woman, was not dressed appropriately. I even heard some people say things like, "Ka pjese trupit jasht," or "she has a particular body part outside exposed," when someone was showing a lot of skin. Older women in particular were extremely concerned with our state of health. If I didn't have my jacket zipped up, they would say something like "pof dofish," or "domerdistish," or like "don grihish," to warn me, following it with the quintessential Albanian nod from side to side, indicating that this information was true. It's kind of like that. I eventually came to learn that all of these phrases meant more or less the same thing: you're gonna get cold. And I also learned that the unusual movement of tipping the head side to side, kind of like this, meant yes, like this is true. It's kind of like, you're gonna get cold. In extreme situations, the older women would accompany their warnings by shoving an article of clothing in my hand secretively, as if they were passing me something contraband. It became clear that when I wasn't dressed properly, I was actually embarrassing myself. I was giving the impression that no one loved me enough to stop me before I left the house. It wasn't like in America where people saw it as a personal choice of mine. The women took pity on me and were sneaky about giving me clothes as a way to spare my reputation. As time went on, I began to learn other words in Albanian as I saw this tradition extended even high into the mountains of Montenegro. Up there, they interchanged the word ftoft with krit, as Bora and I found out when we were hiking with a family one day through some of the most beautiful terrain I've ever seen. The custom remained the same even when the word changed. I was learning fast, so fast that being cold was a serious concern in these Albanian lands. Needless to say, the custom was everywhere we went. People always asked Bora and me if we had scarves. "A keni shala?" By the end of the trip, if we didn't have them on us at the time, you better believe they were close by. And then they would ask us if we had jackets or coats. "A keni jaketa?" And lastly, and this one took me some time to understand, I finally learned that that they were asking if I wanted more layers when they said "A doni ma stresa?" Not if I wanted more stress. The answer to all of these must, at all times, be yes. Yes, you always want more layers. Just say yes. At first, I will admit, I hated it because I felt like I had no personal freedom. I wanted to respect their culture, but it was practically impossible to keep so many clothes on. I hated how in the poorer homes, when there was no extra slippers for guests, the grandmothers would give me the slippers off their feet and the sweaters off their backs. I hated it because I felt incredibly guilty for not being able to reciprocate and foolish for not having planned my wardrobe better. To make matters worse, I hated that when they gave me their shoes, none fit. I have feet the size of an average man in Albania, not woman. The whole time I was there, I felt out of place and huge, except in Montenegro where everyone is so tall. I knew that people were being nice, but all that love and warmth felt strange to me, and my first reaction was to reject it. I was never used to people being so concerned with my physical well-being, and I felt like I didn't deserve their attention or love. Not only that, but their habits forced me to examine how much I valued being an individual. At first, I hated how when we were having coffee, the woman that we were with would hug me unexpectedly and ask me if I was cold, curling up with me, holding my hand. It annoyed me to walk arm in arm down the street with women who were so much shorter than me because I had to modify my stride. It seemed insecure, weak, and codependent to me, not to mention smothering. But then suddenly I realized something. Despite all its deserts and beaches, America is a very cold place. We value those who do things on their own, alone, solitary. America demands you stand on your own 2 feet, survive without support, and focus on securing resources for yourself and yourself alone. In America, we don't touch each other that much, so I didn't understand how to appreciate it. I was so used to dealing with the temperature on my own that this attention to clothing and reliance on shared body heat was strange to me. But as the days went by, they slowly broke me down with their warm disposition. As November turned to December, the temperature dropped and it got colder and colder in the region. We bundled up and snuggled together at coffee even more. And each day the Albanian people showed me what it meant to be part of a group mentality by sharing their clothes, food, and drinks with each other and with me. Even the coffee shops and restaurants had blankets for people who were sitting outside or near windows. It was incredible how many resources were available to stay warm. Much to my disbelief, as I learned to appreciate bundling up and being surrounded by people at all times, I got colder. I mean to say that my tolerance for the cold declined, and I started to need the extra scarves and layers. I don't remember exactly which day it started, but I remember that I felt like a completely different person one night in Macedonia. We were at the house of the Halimis, the family of a good friend of mine in Atlanta. They had a wood-burning stove in their living room, and by Balkan standards it was cold and miserable outside, so I welcomed the warmth of the stove. And for some reason, instead of fearing it, I began to long for the closeness and the touch that Albanian people receive you with. I needed family that night. At their house, I welcomed the extra sweater and warm slippers, curling up next to the wood-burning stove and listening to stories about my friend when he was younger. Now that I'm back in America, I think back to that attentiveness of the people in all the Albanian lands we visited, and it makes me smile. These days, I'm more aware of my own body's needs, and I don't try so hard to tough out the cold. Then again, maybe it's not so much about the physical, but rather the emotional. The Albanian people taught me that it's okay to love and receive love. And even though by opening my heart I take in the good and the bad, the cold and the hot, I know I can handle that cold. And I have confidence that I will be warm, because I have Albanian friends. And when I'm far from them, I can remember that what they taught me and try to teach my friends. It's more fun to rely on shared body heat in more layers than to tough it out in the cold alone. Part of me will always believe that it's the warm spirit of the Albanian people that taught me these lessons. I can now appreciate actions that I once viewed as smothering. Because in Albania, it just feels different. There's something eternally warming about the Albanian lands. Thanks.